Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unravel a famous medical mystery that literally starts with a sensational label. We all know the name, right? But history has a funny way of obscuring the real flesh and blood stories behind those catchy nicknames. Today, we're going to look at the science, the crazy investigation, and the incredible ethical dilemmas surrounding one of history's absolute most fascinating public health crises. Now, what's really interesting here is how an Irish immigrant cook, who basically just wanted to make a living, earned this absolutely terrifying moniker. Imagine opening the newspaper in June of 1909 and this banner headline is staring right back at you. Her actual name was Mary Mallon. She was a hardworking, intelligent professional who somehow found herself at the very center of some of the most critical medical and legal questions of the 20th century. So, how on earth did she get here? Let's find out. Chapter 1: The Oyster Bay Mystery. Let's set the idyllic scene in the summer of 1906. You really have to ask yourself, how did a disease usually associated with deprived conditions and, well, filth, manage to strike such an exclusive community? Oyster Bay on Long Island was an incredibly affluent enclave. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt had a summer home nearby. The wealthy Thompson family had rented out their lavish estate to the Warrens, who were a prominent banking family. So, when an outbreak hit this specific house, public health authorities were totally baffled. They inspected the plumbing, they checked the water supply, which was perfectly clean, by the way. They even went so far as to investigate the local clam vendors. Nothing. Zero. It just didn't make any sense. And the situation escalated rapidly. The crucial point here is that this wasn't just some mild summer diarrhea. It was a terrifying, completely unexplained outbreak of typhoid fever, and there was no cure. 9-year-old Margaret spiked 105-degree fever and developed this telltale abdominal rash they called rose spots. Soon after, her sister, 2 servants, and the gardener were all severely ill. Back then, care was really just palliative. You basically had to just pray and wait it out.
Moving on to Chapter 2, Catching the Carrier, the Desperate Hunt for the Culprit.
Now, catching Mary required a pretty unconventional detective. The owner of the home, Mrs. Thompson, absolutely refused to let her property be branded a typhoid house, so she went out and hired Dr. George Soper. Now get this, he wasn't actually a medical doctor. His PhD was literally in mining, but he was an absolute expert in tracing contamination. Later on, when Soper's, let's say, rather tactless approach totally failed, the city brought in Dr. Josephine Baker. She was one of the few female physicians in New York at the time, and they were really hoping she could reason with a working-class woman. It brilliantly illustrates the varied team needed to crack this case. So Soper was reading up on the latest medical literature, and he stumbled upon this radical, highly provocative concept from an eminent German microbiologist named Robert Koch. See, the prevailing wisdom back then was that you had to be visibly sick to spread a disease, or it had to come from dirty water. But Koch had described a case over in Europe of a perfectly healthy person spreading deadly microbes. And Soper suspected this is exactly what was happening right there in Oyster Bay. Soper started digging, and he discovered that just before the outbreak, the Warrens had hired a new cook with impeccable references, Mary Mallon. By checking the employment agency records, Soper tracked down her past jobs, and what he found was staggering. He uncovered 22 victims across 6 different families. Almost everywhere she cooked, typhoid followed right behind her. Soper eventually tracked Mary down to a new job on Park Avenue. Now, when he confronted her, and he did this quite tactlessly at a home where a young woman was actively dying of typhoid, he bungled the interview completely. I mean, think about it from Mary's perspective, right? She felt perfectly healthy. To her, this strange guy showing up and demanding blood and stool samples was absurd and honestly insulting. So she furiously grabbed a carving fork and literally chased him out the back door in fear for his life. Chapter 3: Liberty versus Public Health, a massive ethical conundrum. Eventually, health officials forced Mary into an ambulance and locked her up in a cottage on North Brother Island, basically invoking a centuries-old practice. Quarantine was originally designed for isolating actual ships to stop the plague. But Mary wasn't a ship, and she wasn't even sick, yet there she was, held at Riverside Hospital against her will, completely isolated from society. But on the flip side, we really must neutrally consider her constitutional rights here. The principle of habeas corpus protects against indefinite imprisonment without a trial. Mary had committed no crime whatsoever. She was essentially a prisoner without legal representation, detained purely based on what she biologically carried inside her. It's a genuine conundrum. How do you protect unsuspecting citizens from a deadly disease while at the same time upholding the fundamental rights of an uncooperative yet completely healthy-feeling individual? Chapter 4. The Deadly Return. The Tragedy Strikes Again. Despite the public sympathy that actually led to her release in 1910, after she promised to never cook again, of course, things were about to take a turn for the worse. You see, she was an unmarried, 40-year-old woman in an era way before social safety nets, and her name had been completely dragged through the sensationalist press. Unable to find other work to survive, she changed her name to Mary Brown and took a job cooking at a hospital. This sparked a deadly and totally devastating outbreak at the prestigious Sloan Hospital for Women. 25 people fell ill, 2 victims died, and Mary Brown mysteriously vanished right before investigators even arrived. The police eventually found her hiding in a friend's bathroom, and after that Sloan Hospital outbreak, any public sympathy she had left completely evaporated. At age 46, she was sent right back to North Brother Island. This timeline seamlessly connects her initial capture, her desperate relapse into cooking, and her final decades. She lived out her remaining years spent in total isolation on that island, eventually working in the lab there, until she died in 1938 after suffering a paralyzing stroke years earlier. Chapter 5. The Biology of a Carrier. Let's look at the science. But how exactly was she transmitting this deadly bacteria without ever feeling sick herself? Well, a simple, visceral action, like making homemade peach ice cream, basically became the perfect biological weapon. Most of Mary's food was actually cooked, which thankfully killed the bacteria. But this specific dessert was served raw. She sliced the peaches by hand, transferring the microbes, dropping them into raw cream, and just leaving it out in the warm August afternoon air provided the absolute perfect incubator for those bacteria to multiply before the family even ate it. And here is the actual science behind the mystery. Today, we know that the Salmonella typhi bacteria can infect the liver and travel straight to the gallbladder. If a person has gallstones, the organism colonizes them, creating this incredibly rigid, long-lasting biofilm. It's like a biological fortress. This acted as a safe harbor for the bacteria, keeping Mary completely asymptomatic while she continuously shed microbes into her intestinal tract and ultimately onto her hands. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Epidemiology, the Foundation of Modern Public Health. Mary's tragic story ultimately laid the foundation for how we systematically protect public health today. This modern field, epidemiology, literally means the study of what is upon the people. So the crucial point here is that to solve these mysteries, a modern epidemiologist has to be a natural multitasker. You need to understand science, engineering, and statistics, sure, but you also need history, sociology, and even psychology just to get people to cooperate with you. Today, thanks to lessons learned, the landscape is entirely different. A massive network works behind the scenes to keep us safe. Clinical laboratories act as sentinel labs within what we call the Laboratory Response Network. If multiple labs report the exact same strain of Salmonella, public health epidemiologists immediately know there's a common source out there. And unlike Mary, who had her name and face plastered all over the newspapers, today we have HIPAA regulations. These strictly and legally protect patient privacy, carefully balancing public safety with individual dignity. To wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder long after we're done here. Mary Mallon's story isn't just some dusty medical history. It is a living, breathing question. Our science and our privacy laws have advanced incredibly, but that core tension, it's still there. If an asymptomatic carrier of a deadly new disease emerged tomorrow, how would we balance their constitutional rights against the safety of the public? How do we protect the many without unjustly punishing the one? It's a hugely complex puzzle, and understanding the mystery of Typhoid Mary is just the very first step in solving it.